Now, your moderator for this session is Matt Scott, who's co-founder of Insurance Data Lab. And joining him, we have Heather Smith, who's Managing Director, LV, General Insurance Retail. And we have Paul Harvey, who's CEO of Adiona Insurance, and James Daly from Fairer Finance. So I'm sure you'll hear a lot more about them and from them. I'm just going to hand this over to you. And we may have time for some questions at the end. So please do start thinking about those. And over to you.
Thanks very much. So yeah, thanks for joining us today. Heather, if I can come to you first, strange things. What do you think customers are looking for from their insurer when it comes to customer experience, and how's that been changing?
Well, I think the first thing they want, we find quite simply every time, is they want it to be right first time, they want it to be easy, and they want to make sure you've met their needs. And whatever that is, whichever channel or place they are, we found that focusing on those three things, so we don't target people, they don't have targets, we only look at those three measures, and that has helped us literally transform our customer experience regardless of channel. And what we found is that our staff are so much happier because it's so simple. We ask them just to do those three things for customers, but I think it's embedded culturally in the DNA and in the values of the organisation, and it's about consistency over time. So that has to be the way you work all the time, end to end across the business.
Absolutely, yeah. And Paul, I know you're not live writing policies yet, but you've done quite a bit of consumer research in this area. What would you say kind of customers are looking for?
I think the customer just wants a fair deal, right? I think they want their data protected. They want a completely digital, always-on experience. But there's just a lot of things that the way we underwrite and we rate consumers are just wrong. I don't think history is going to be very kind to the way we look back at the way we used wealth, credit, occupation, what type of driver's license you have. It has nothing to do with how you drive, what you drive, or the driving conditions. And some of this stuff about selling your policy, selling your claims, we just think it's fundamentally wrong. And so our view is about customer first, fairness, completely digital, and make sure we've got our North Star in the right direction.
And James, I saw you nodding along to some of that there. What was your take on that?
Well, I mean, what consumers want depends where they are in the journey, and what they want if they're making a claim is probably quite different to what they're making when they're buying it. When they're buying it, they want to get out of there as quickly as possible at the cheapest price and have had a really slick, easy experience. But actually, insurance is ultimately just a promise, and as slick as the front end is, that's all really worthless if the moment of truth doesn't work out. So, I think actually if you interrogate beyond the sort of top level question, what do consumers want? You go and ask them, and they'll tell you they want cheap price and they want it to be out of there quickly. But actually, what they want is it to pay out, and they want that process to be easy. They want it to be no fuss, and unfortunately, it isn't always like that. And that's the fundamental where insurance lets itself down is that insurance spend all their time telling consumers how they're going to be there whenever, giving them the expectation that insurance is there to cover you whatever, and then actually at the back end consumers start to learn the hard way that isn't the truth. So actually what they want is insurers that keep their promise, or at least are really clear about what they're not promising.
Yeah, no, so it's interesting kind of that word promise there, because we've done some research at Insurance Data Lab using some of your Fairer Finance data actually. And if I can just, hopefully we can, oh no, that looks like it's gone onto the wrong thing there, apologies, sorry. So we'll leave that. But yeah, we've done some research where it's kind of consumer trust has dipped kind of in the industry, and looking at kind of trust levels at the moment, standing around 51%, which obviously doesn't sound great. 1 in 2 people almost not trusting their insurer. What would you say, where would you say the industry is falling short in terms of that, and what can be done to improve trust in the sector?
So, as I said, consumers want to get in and out as quickly as possible because nobody wants to spend any more time they have to buying their insurance. And insurers kind of fall into the trap of getting into the race of who can serve it up as quickly as possible, when actually that's probably the only moment where you have your customer's attention. So to build trust, you need to use the purchase experience as a time to very clearly set your customers' expectations about what you're covering, and equally as importantly, what you're not covering, so that when they come to claim stage, they're not kind of crossing their fingers and bracing themselves for a big disappointment, which I think is how a lot of people go into insurance claims at the moment. And I think if insurers can crack that and get expectations level with the offering, then you've got a basis to rebuild trust. But at the moment, with the greatest respect to LV, we pay 99% of all claims. Well, what does that tell the customer? It doesn't tell them, well, actually, if you want a courtesy car, it depends whether or not your car was written off or it was stolen or it's in the garage. It just says we pay 99%. But actually it's 99% of valid claims, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't count as a claim. And so I just think we need to kind of roll back from that and start saying...
But I would say absolutely, but that's why you have a really honest two-way conversation with your customer. You use language that they understand, you don't hide anything in the T's and C's, you engage with them, you help them, and you communicate them through the process so they absolutely know where they stand. And we build empathy and we build trust into how we deal with customers, and we ask them for their honest feedback, and we don't mind if they publish it too, because transparency and fairness and having the right values in the organisation, I think, matter. And of course, not everything is paid out on, as you say, but that has to be clear to the consumer up front. We all know sometimes consumers don't want to read everything up front, which is why at the claim stage we make sure we handhold them through the process so they know.
And yeah, that's interesting. Kind of, you come on to our research again, Heather. LV actually kind of come top in each of the last 3 years of the analysis we've done. So you mentioned they're kind of having those honest conversations. Kind of, what else would you say kind of LV's doing differently that maybe kind of helps you stand out from the crowd a bit?
Well, I think the one thing we ask our staff to do, as I said, is build empathy with customers, make sure we're completely fair and transparent with them. Even when it's, say, a complaint, the worst thing that can happen to you, both to our employees and to our customers. But we are transparent and honest and upfront with them. We don't hide and say it was something in the T's and C's. We pull the T and C out and we talk them through it, and we're really clear with them. We happily engage in the conversation and the clarity. And I think we've built our customer experience on values and built it through the brand, which is we put people and customers at the heart. And if our people are well looked after, well trained, and really believe they're there to look after the customer, then the customer feels it in their dealings with us. And I don't think you can step away from the fact that the right values, and we've got the regulator looking at it now, haven't we? We've got them looking at the culture of organisations, we've got them looking at fair value, we've got them looking at conduct, vulnerable customers, and quite right, I say, that's absolutely right, that we should have that scrutiny.
And I think you had a kind of interesting initiative as well, kind of during COVID with your Green Heart support campaign. Can you talk a bit about that as well?
Yeah, so when COVID hit, of course, all insurers, I believe, fundamentally wanted to do the right thing. We thought about what was right for our brand, and we launched for our customers the Green Heart Support Fund. We put £30 million up for all customers who needed help. We didn't, if they were made unemployed, we didn't do any detriment to them. If they needed to change their cover, we didn't charge them any fees, etc. So we tried to be really, really fair. We helped our suppliers when they were finding it difficult. We increased our suppliers' rates, and we asked our people to engage as well with the communities that they worked in. And what we found was that our customers who didn't need help really wanted more help to go to those that did. So you could say it's right or wrong, rather than giving something to absolutely everyone, we gave a lot more to those that needed it most.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, brilliant. And Paul, when we spoke a couple of weeks ago ahead of this session, you told me kind of Adiona's tagline is fairness, transparency, and putting the customer first. Now, as I said earlier, you haven't actually launched yet, but can you talk a bit about how you're going to go about living up to that ambition, and why you think you've got something different to kind of players already in the market?
Yep. Well, first of all, it's a completely digital experience, so always on data. We're doing digital-enabled underwriting, so we'll have good selection We've already, using AI models, we can price the entire UK market using some of the price comparison websites. And I would just, to one of the points earlier, 85% of the market in the UK is the price comparison websites. And that tells you something, right? There are some very good brokers out there. And that we've allowed this to be completely price-driven just tells you something about what's happened to the market. But our approach is really dealing with the tail risk. So we want to retain our customers, not bother them. But there may be some in our insurer pool that are seriously dangerous and can really hurt people. Our experience on crash and claim, we think we've got some of the best people in the market. A lot of this experience has come from Southern Italy, where crash and claim is just absolutely required to be successful. You want to deal with real claims instantaneously, headless, as much as possible. But you got to manage for, unfortunately, opportunistic fraud or actual fraud. The good drivers are paying for the bad drivers, and this is where you've got to tackle that. And then with all of this, the case we're making to the reinsurers, which is absolutely critical for catastrophic losses, is we've got a much better insured pool. But we should be able to go to not just the low premium pools. We should be able to go wherever we need to go. And we've got some communities that are in real need where a lot of insurers have just abandoned the community, that we're trying to work with them because we think this digital approach, we can insure anywhere. And we've built our systems and processes to really scale. And that's the approach, is completely digital, value to the customer, and really give the simplest experience possible. But in fairness, just starting, all those sort of things, but really designing from ground zero. But we have some of the best people in the marketplace. Penny Searles is one of the best entrepreneurs in the UK. Richard Hutchinson, Brian Pissell, two of the top executives from Progressive. Michael Halb here, who's the CEO, was the CEO of here. He's also on the board of Zurich Insurance, kind of an at-scale data. Because we see the world in 3 to 7 years where all the cars are connected to the internet. And we need to make sure that customer experience is protected, their data is protected, but they're also getting a fair deal for what's about to approach them, and we're building our company that way.
Absolutely. One of kind of the, I suppose, issues some people have kind of said about telematics and kind of having those connected cars is that there could become drivers who almost become uninsurable, if they've got a bad driving record. Kind of how do you think the insurance industry can deal with that in terms of those poorer drivers?
Yeah. We've been working with Lloyd's Market because and I was invited to the chairman of Lloyd's office on the 12th floor at Lime Street, the ground zero for insurance. And I went up to their rooms, and the boardrooms, and they have all these ships that Lloyd's originally insured. And we reflected on that, and where Lloyd's started was the captain, the vessel, and the destination. Some of those factors can change at any point in time, but you have to have the ability to dynamically adjust. And I think that's really what we're going to talk about in the 21st century is going back to some of the principles of insurance. And that's really where we're headed in trying to build that. And so, let me put it in a different way. If you're a good driver and you're following all these things and you have an accident, why should I raise your rates? I priced that risk. You paid me for it. That's the way that this should go. And I think fundamentally, fairness and transparency and putting the customer first is how we view this. And look, we're a startup. This is one of the premier insurers in the country. I don't want to say but we have a vision that we can do this differently. And that's our intention of how we plan to move forward.
James, I saw you kind of nodding along to the point there Paul made about kind of not increasing rates for good drivers who've had a claim. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think that insurance pricing needs some boundaries drawn around it, and at the moment there aren't really any apart from the Equality Act, and there are some anomalies that are just demonstrably unfair to large segments of the customer base. My sort of favourite example is people having their premiums go up when they're involved in an accident that wasn't their fault, not even one that was their fault. And, there are statistical bases for those price rises, but of course, there is a segment of people who are penalised completely unfairly. And so, I absolutely agree with, the point being made about not pushing up premiums after somebody's had an accident because they've been priced accurately. However, there is a tension, isn't there, between, how far we go down the road towards finding the right price for everybody versus pooling risk, which is, talking about the origins of insurance is what insurance was all about. And, the sort of pursuit of the right price for every individual, I don't think is really ever achievable. But having said that, I'm much more comfortable with it being based on people's driving than I am on it being based on their occupation and where they live and, what goes into their shopping basket and everything else that these days goes into people's price. So, I think that, hopefully, if telematics is used responsibly and is transparent, then what it would do is encourage people to drive better, and that will be a good thing, and there will be less accidents on the roads. But I think, we need to have a look at where it is okay for insurers to price, what pieces of data are right to go into those algorithms, and what actually are wrong and are creating unfair outcomes. And that's not a debate that this industry has had in the recent past at all.
I think you're right, but I do think, we have an ethics policy around what is right to use and what is not right to use. And we're really clear on that. It's scrutinised independently because I agree with you. There's things you shouldn't use and shouldn't ever use around a consumer. And having independent people scrutinise what you use and how you use it through our ethics committee, I think, helps us achieve that balance. And, very publicly available to consumers.
Absolutely, and just keeping an eye on time. And before we move on to the Q&A, I did want to touch on the issue of complaints handling. So in our research, this is an area that's kind of dragged down the industry, particularly over the last 12 months. But Heather, kind of LV has generally performed quite strongly on this measure in our analysis. How kind of do you go about handling complaints, and kind of, if you talk about that a bit, that would be great.
Well, the main thing we try to do is not have a complaint turn into a complaint. So it's about engaging with the consumer upfront in a very empathetic, straightforward and honest way to avoid the complaint in the first place. And I think that's why we have the lowest level of complaints in the industry consistently over many years, because we ask our people to help consumers sort it out in a two-way, honest, upfront conversation, rather than wait to the point where it's all gone wrong. Now, of course, things do go wrong. I absolutely understand that. We openly engage with the FORS. We're transparent about what we do. We don't automatically assume that, that we're right. Yeah. We absolutely ask to make sure and kind of validate, go through with the customer. I've taken a couple of them myself. One from an elderly gentleman, to help him go through it, to help me understand what was in his head and why he was thinking the way he was. And I think just a calm, rational, honest conversation with the customer is usually the best way through it. But when things go wrong, be fair. Compensate them properly, own up, and sort it out for them. But most importantly, and I think the reason some people have recurring complaints is because they don't sort the system that caused it in the first place. They paper over the problem then, as opposed to sort the system so the problem doesn't happen again. And I think, we adopt systems thinking. I know lots of companies do. We focus on value, we take out waste, and we make sure that the system, we don't blame the people, we look at the system and why that might have caused the problem in the first place.
And how important is your relationship with the FOS for, spotting those kind of trends where you maybe have issues that are kind of recurrent, and then so you can solve the system?
Really important to have an open two-way dialogue with them. We engage them, we take cases to them, we ask for their advice. Where we feel perhaps we're not clear. We've run quite a few workshops with them, for our people, so that they tell us, is this best practice? We think this is best practice, you help guide us. So you've got to build trust with the FOS. I think it's really important.
And James, you see kind of some product lines and some insurers have particularly high upheld rates, so the insurer is finding in favour of kind of the customer more than people would like. What would you say the industry can do to help bring down the upheld rate?
Well, obviously, a complaint that has been upheld by the Ombudsman is, the sort of the epitome of failure by a customer standard. They've complained, they've had their complaint rejected, they've had to wait and then take it to the Ombudsman and then probably waited months, and then finally they've been validated by the Ombudsman that they were in the right all along. Firms need to stop their complaints going there. There are some people that basically use the Ombudsman, as a sort of outsourced complaints department and are quite happy to pay the 550 quid or whatever it is these days, to see a whole batch of their complaints going there. But they have to remember that, the damage done by those 1 in 3, and it is 1 in 3 complaints in general insurance that is upheld at the Ombudsman, is exponential in terms of its impact on the industry's reputation as a whole and the way people perceive insurers. Those are the things that, when you've been in a dispute with a company for over a year and you were finally vindicated, you're going to tell everybody you know about it. So don't let your complaints go to the Ombudsman unless you are absolutely sure that you've got it right, or you're trying to test a principle, and then you can go back and apply that to your wider book of complaints. But, 2/3 of complaints are upheld in the company's favour, 1/3 in favour of the consumer. And I think, we see the very best companies managing to get that down to sort of 10%, I think, being upheld. And I think that's what all companies should be aiming for. Whereas most companies we speak to think that 25% is a kind of acceptable level. And I think people just need to raise their aspirations there.
Yeah, absolutely. And Paul, how's the Adiodin going to approach this?
Yeah, I mean, all these complaints, processes are great, but customers ticked off, right? And we've designed this on one of the largest core systems platforms called Duck Creek. And we proved last week in Las Vegas that we could take, and we really don't like the word telematics, it's data, right? Data-driven insurance, because we proved that we could take multiple devices and instantaneously adjust underwriting criteria and push it out immediately. Same thing on complaints. Customer's not happy, they push a button. You need to deal with it ASAP, right? I mean, it's great to have the experience up front and a good conversation. I agree with that's great. We don't have the opportunity as a startup to have the premier customer base that LV has. We're going to be out there really pushing. The customer's not happy, it's got to be dealt with. Yeah. You're absolutely right. The fact that if it's gone that far, you have completely failed.
I agree.
This has got to be instantaneous and dealt with just as people expect for Deliveroo or they expect for Amazon. It has to be instantaneously resolved. Absolutely.
Okay, well, we're approaching the final few minutes of the session now. So I'm just going to welcome on Dan King, my fellow co-founder at Insurance Data Lab, because I think he's had some questions coming in kind of virtually.
Yes, indeed. There's been a few questions coming up on Slido, but has anybody in the audience got any questions to kick us off? Can't see any hands. So we'll go. Oh, yeah, one gentleman over here. Is there a microphone for the gentleman that's here? If you don't mind waiting a second, it should be with you very shortly.
Hi there. I just wanted to know what the panel's thoughts were on the emergence of Tesla and Amazon into the marketplace.
Yeah.
Sorry, what was the question? I didn't hear.
The emergence of Tesla and Amazon coming into the insurance marketplace, obviously, or certainly in the coming months.
Yeah. Going good. So we had the head of Amazon Insurance come to our demonstration last week, and they said they're not going to enter insurance. They're going to enter small business insurance that's complementary, but they will not, in terms of personal lines, they don't want to be in there. We also had the same discussion with Apple. I think Tesla is interesting because it's really the discussion about embedded insurance, and Tesla's got a problem right now because it's got an expensive vehicle and generally very wealthy drivers, which makes it a difficult risk to insure. But we think the concept of embedded insurance is going to happen, and I think that's why we would and why we've designed our processes to be able to embed with those types of players, because ultimately, as with Tesla, the data is going to come directly from the cars. I mean, these are the best telematic devices on the planet, is going to be the cars itself. And I think that's where the customer is going to want the experience. And some of them will want brokers, but you must have that type of embedded insurance designed into your product offering. And let's hope that we can be better insurers. I don't think Tesla wants to go into the insurance business. I think they had to do it. And that's the opportunity or challenge that all of us face going ahead.
What about more traditional insurer like LV? How do you feel about an organisation with huge data points?
Yeah, I mean, data is what we are focused on. I mean, the biggest growth part of our business is our data science and data team, because as Paul quite rightly says, data is the key to everything going forward. So, we're the largest electric vehicle insurer at the moment, and that's all been built off the insight and the data right through. And it's not just that, it's also the proposition. The proposition has to be right for the electric vehicle owner. It's not just about it's protecting their cables, making sure the repair's right. When they're in a courtesy car, it's an EV car, etc. But I think if Amazon were to enter, I mean, Paul's saying they're not going to enter the personal lines market. If I did, I think you could probably see the way in which Amazon would enter, which is, they have a market store, everything's quality rated. It's not just about price, it's about customer experience as well. And I imagine that's the way they would approach it if they did.
Thanks. Any further questions from the floor? Okay, well, I'll ask some questions from that have come in from Slido. But if anybody does want to ask a question, feel free to raise your hand. But I'll ask the panel one question that's come in here about the complaints and about the Ombudsman. And the question is simply, what can be done to stop complaints from reaching the Ombudsman in the first place?
Happy to take that.
Go for it.
I mean, we do a lot of work with insurers, helping them improve the clarity of their customer journeys, helping them rewrite their policy documents. And we often find that some of the ways that people think about insurance internally are mismatched with the way the consumer thinks about it. So there are very logical ways of thinking about what risk the insurer wants to insure that are just incompatible with the way the Ombudsman thinks about a complaint, which is what is fair and reasonable. And actually, we spend a lot of time explaining to insurers that your policy wordings are not doing what you think they're doing, because you may have written in there that you're not going to pay out a claim in this circumstance, but actually, if the Ombudsman looks at it and goes, well, that's not really a fair or reasonable thing to say in your policy, and it was written on page 23 of the document anyway, then it's going to be hard for you to stand by it. So, it really goes back to what I was saying earlier, that you have to draw out all those anomalies that are in your policy documents, and there are plenty which I think, even the best insurers take for granted because they're just sort of baked in, and peel them out and put them in front of the customer so that you can realistically say we did everything we could to help our customer understand exactly what they were buying here, and strip out some of those anomalies and those oddities that sit in there that just don't really hold muster. I remember somebody being made to pay a claim because a mobile phone was stolen from the man's bedside, and the thief had come in through the upstairs window that had been left open on a summer's night while he was sleeping. And the policy document said, we won't pay unless there's been evidence of force. And the Ombudsman said, well, they did have to open the window, so we'll count that as force because we think it's only reasonable that people are paid out for things being stolen by their bedside table if they leave their window open on a summer night. So then the insurer responded by putting "and violence" on the end of it. And, that would have just resulted in the Ombudsman coming up with another reason. What they were saying is it's okay if we leave our phones on our bedside table and our windows open on summer nights. And, you're not allowed to put a clause in there that doesn't pay for that. So, there's some cultural changes that need to take place in the industry.
Okay, thank you. There's one other question. I think we're slightly over time, but I think I'm allowed to ask one more question. So there's a question here about whether you think customer experience in insurance will be affected post-COVID due to the amount of business interruption claims being submitted, and will insurers neglect customer experience?
Well, I work on the personal line side, but I think we have seen the impact of the business insurance problem. The fact that it went to court, it was so public. Of course, consumer trust was damaged. It definitely was. And I think it's probably a wake-up call to say you have to rebuild trust with consumers, and you have to really, really, to the point James has just made, be very clear what your policies cover and don't cover. And the areas of grey and the ambiguity are where the problems reside. Now, sometimes it's impossible to think of absolutely every single thing, but the essence of it has to be absolute clarity for the customer, and all the shades of grey cast away. And I know that the commercial insurers have been working very hard on rebuilding trust with consumers, which is essential.
Paul, did you want to?
Yeah, I agree with that. LV is a great company, but I'll just talk about the industry as a whole. The regulator has said no more price walking or price laddering. This concept of raising your prices on your most loyal customers, and you can get it cheaper on the web. And the response of the industry is going to be to offer new brands, right? Stuff the channel with vouchers. I mean, have we gone out of our minds in terms of trust and transparency? I mean, and this is taking advantage of people that won't complain or get aggressive on the phone, or it is just so fundamentally broken. Or we're an insurer that's not at fault. If they're at fault, they'll fight like hell to make sure that the rental car is not too long, the courtesy car, or the repair inflation. And the minute they know that they're not at fault, they sell the claim. They sell the claim where the incentive is exactly the opposite. This sector is broke, and it needs to be fixed, and we need to put trust back to where it belongs, in customers' hands.
Yeah, you're not the new regulation on the SCA. You're not allowed to have any. The price setter's not allowed to have any vouchers or incentives, so that won't be allowed going forward.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much for that, guys. That's going to bring the end now. So if you can just show your appreciation for our panel. And yeah, thank you very much.